Another day, another story. The question of whether the mind exists separately from the body has been a topic of interest for many years. Some believe that the mind and body are one and cannot be separated. Others argue that the mind and body are two separate entities and that the mind exists independently, even after the body dies. To begin, let's first understand what we mean by the mind. The mind is the part of us that thinks, feels, perceives, and remembers. It is the seat of our consciousness, and it is what makes us who we are. Now, the question is whether the mind is merely a byproduct of the brain, or whether it is something that exists in its own right. Some argue that the mind is simply a collection of electrical impulses and neural activity in the brain, and that without it, there can be no mind. But others argue that there is more to the mind than just the brain. They believe that the mind is something that exists separately from the body and that it can continue to exist even after the body dies. This belief is often linked to the idea of the soul. Some believe that the soul is the seat of the mind and that it exists outside of the body. They argue that when the body dies, the soul continues to exist, and that this is what gives us our continued consciousness. Others argue that there is a more scientific basis for the existence of the mind separately from the body. They point to near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences as evidence that the mind can exist independently of the body. They argue that during these experiences, the mind is able to perceive things that are outside of the physical body, and that this suggests that there is more to the mind than just the brain. Despite this, there is still much debate about whether the mind exists separately from the body. Some argue that the mind is simply a product of the brain, while others believe that it is something that exists in its own right. Ultimately, the question of whether the mind exists independently of the body is one that is unlikely to be definitively answered anytime soon. In conclusion, the question of whether the mind exists separately from the body is a fascinating and complex one. There are arguments on both sides, and the debate is likely to continue for many more years to come. Whether you believe that the mind is simply a product of the brain or whether it is something that exists in its own right, it is clear that the mind is a fundamental aspect of who we are, as regardless of whether the mind exists independently of the body or not. It is undeniable that our thoughts and emotions have a profound impact on our physical health and well-being. Studies have shown that practices such as meditation and mindfulness can have positive effects on both the mind and body. So, while the debate may continue, it is important to recognize the interconnectedness of our mental and physical states and strive for balance in both. Thanks for watching.